I dropped out of high school back in 1985, got hooked on crack cocaine, you know, and that went from one thing to another. I ended up on ice, ecstasy, heroin, acid, powder, crack, cigarettes, and alcohol. Have been locked up 41 times, almost overdosed 4 times, 3 separate suicide attempts, and was stuck in some really bad stuff for like 12, 13 years. And, you know, I would find myself out in the streets walking around, you know, picking up cigarettes off the ground, eating out the garbage cans, and, you know, just picking up empty bottles of alcohol out of the club parking lots and stuff after they closed and stuff, because I was really bad off, man. But I still had the gift of music. I could rap. I was still doing music in clubs and stuff when I wasn't getting high. And so I decided to leave Atlanta after I got hooked on the dope because I thought a change of scenery would help me out. So I moved to Miami for like 5 years. And I ended up getting signed when I got down there, man. I got signed to Foresight Records. I went from Foresight to Vision Records. I went from Vision Records to, Next Plateau. From there, I went to The Face Records here in Atlanta. And there was one other label, Next Plateau out of New York City. So I've been signed with 5 major labels, you know, just because I left Atlanta. But I was still a junkie. So, you know, I was just I just kept asking the Lord, you know what I'm saying, to set me free, you know, and I had a real serious problem, man. When I got back to Atlanta, I was still on dope. I left Florida because of a situation involving drugs and alcohol. So when I got back to Atlanta, I still had that situation. But at the end of the day, man, I was in the street on Boulevard, walking around just trying to get money to get high, and I couldn't get the cash. So I decided to change my story up, and I literally just started lying on God, you know, and I was telling people, with God as my witness, I just got out of jail and just needed to get some money to get something to eat. And, you know, some people would tell me, you know, Brother Greg, I'll give you this money, but, you know, if you're lying, that's between you and God. And so at the same time, when I was acquiring the money from some of the people, they would give it to me that wasn't saved. And the ones I believe were saved were telling me, Brother Greg, I'm going to give you this money, but if you're lying, that's between you and God. So I made about $105 in about an hour.
Yeah.
I got the cash. And I was headed down the street on Boulevard at about 3 p.m. And as I was headed down the street, man, I heard the voice of God speak to me. I didn't realize who it was at first, but he told me, he said, this day your soul shall be dealt with. So I'm walking down the street with the crack pipe in my hand and the money in my pocket. I'm like, man, Negro, you crazy. Nobody's talking to you. Just keep walking. So I kept walking. About 10 seconds later, his voice came back. And he said, this day I call for judgment on the soul of Gregory Lee Todd, man. And when I tell you the Lord snatched my soul out of my body twice. And I wasn't high yet. I hadn't made it to the crack trap. I was still in the middle of the street. And I heard him tell me who he was. He said, for it is I, the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning and the ending, the one with the keys to both heaven and hell. It is I, both the God of your father and the God of your father's father. It is I, both the God of Isaac, Abraham, and of Jacob. And for the sins that thou hast committed against me, this day you shall suffer from eternity. Man, his voice was so loud, I could not believe it. He knocked me face first down in the middle of the street. That's how loud his voice was. And I was down in the street for God knows how long, but his voice did ease up a bit, and I stood up. And after he called for judgment on my soul, he snatched my soul out of my body. The first time I dropped into the ground, everything went completely black, and I was falling and screaming, and I said, Lord God, where am I? And he said, my son, for the place that your soul has been cast into is referred to as Gehenna. I'm sorry, he said, this is the abyss. He said, this is the bottomless pit of darkness and torment, of which you shall remain until the day of damnation. And while I was beneath the ground, he was allowed me to see the day that I was born. I saw the day my mom pushed me out of her womb. As I began to aggress in age from an infant to a toddler, preteen, teenager, every sin I'd ever committed. He showed me when I became an adult and when I became an elderly man. And from that point, he showed me the day I died. I was able to see my own casket. The casket slammed shut, and he told me, see the day of your death. He placed my soul back into my body for the first time, and I'm standing in the street screaming, and I threw the crack pipe and the money on the ground. And I was just saying, Lord God, please forgive me. I'm sorry, Lord, please forgive me. He said, no, my son, it's too late for that. This day your soul shall be dealt with. And he snatched my soul into the ground once again. And the second time he did it, man, and when I tell you it was so hot, from the moment my soul entered wherever I was, I could feel nothing but heat. And I could smell burning flesh and sulfur. And I said, Lord God, where am I? And he said, my son, for the place that your soul has been cast into is referred to as Gehenna. He said, this is the lake of fire, the second death, the place of eternal torment and suffering for those that have continued to sin against me. And while I was in this place, man, I could hear the screams and the wailing of the souls that were in hell. And I could see the fire beneath me. And the only thing I could tell you, man, it's the most terrifying thing I've ever seen in my life. And as I kept falling, he told me, he said, my son, no one will know how you died, but it is that your death will be declared as a medical mystery. He said, but it is I and I alone that is the giver of life, just as it is I and I alone that is the giver of death. For it is I and I alone that decides who lives, just as it is I and I alone that decides who dies. For it is appointed unto man once to die, after this the judgment. Now, I'm falling down to this lake of fire, and I could see these people in the flames screaming and crying. And it was a very, it was a horrible sound. You could just hear the wailing of these souls. But the Lord turned me on my back and allowed me to look up through the ground into the earth from hell. And I could see that the sun was still out, and, there were a few scattered out clouds across the sky. But I saw 3 arms extending from heaven to the ground. The first arm had a hand at the end of it that was holding my physical body standing up in the street. The other 2 arms were blocking the left and the right-hand side of the street that I was standing on. His right hand was blocking the right-hand side of the street at Boulevard and Decatur Street, and his left hand was blocking the left-hand side of the street at Boulevard and Edgewood. So he blocked off the street that I was on, and no car, truck, vehicle, or person came up or down that street that I was on while he was dealing with me. And, my soul descended back down into hell. And he touched my eyes and he allowed me to look into the flames, and I could see the people in hell burning. I watched the fire burn the flesh from their bodies and their bones, and the flesh would simply return, and the fire of hell would once again burn the flesh from their bodies and their bones, and this would continue over and over again. It never stopped. And I'm screaming and I'm falling, and I said, Lord God, please forgive me. And he said, no, my son, it's too late for that. This day your soul shall be dealt with. And he touched my eyes, and he allowed me to look down into the lake of fire. And I could see these people in hell, but I could also see these worms. And the worms had like a dark grayish, greenish color. And I said, Lord God, what are these? And he said, my son, see the worms that never dieth. And I could see these worms moving through this fire at a high rate of speed. They had like a dark grayish, greenish color. And they looked wet. Although they were in the flames, they weren't burning. The people in hell were burning, but the worms wouldn't burn. And I watched them. And I asked him again, I said, Lord God, what are these? And he said, my son, these are the worms that are continuously tormenting the souls that are in the fire for eternity. For this is the judgment. And man, I watched these worms going into these people, and I saw them pulling these worms out of their foreheads, eye sockets, noses, mouths, and from out of all of their body parts. And for like every handful of worms that they would pull out of themselves, thousands more would just rush back into them. And right before I hit the lake of fire beneath me, I saw 2 words come out of the flames of hell, and they said, you knew. And I just fell into the fire screaming. And a few seconds after that, my feet were back on the ground. Man, I broke that crack pipe in the street, and I threw the money down that particular day. And this has been 15 years ago. I never picked up another crack pipe, never picked up another cigarette, never picked up another bottle of alcohol, But then I put the music down, because when I was in the world, I was doing secular music. And it scared me so bad, man, that, I didn't want to touch music anymore. But the Lord sent a very close friend of mine that was a friend of mine when I was in the world, and we were recording secular music together. And he came and told me, he said, man, if God gave you that gift, he gave it to you for a reason. He said, so I don't think he wants you to put it down. Because when I came out of the world, I didn't want to do any more secular music. I didn't want to do any more rap at all. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
But I did go back into the studio. And this is the truth. I attempted to record another secular song right after all this happened to me, called Bust That Dro. It was a weed track, and we knew it was going to sell millions, because the promoters already knew it was going to make some serious money. But while I was in the studio over my friend's house, I'm in the studio with the headphones on and trying to get ready to rock the verse. The Lord said, you will not record this song with this soul. So I took the headphones off and I walked back in the booth, and I said, I said, Paul, I keep hearing his voice in there. Are you talking? I said, you need to be quiet because I'm trying to get down to business. He said, man, I ain't said a word to you. He said, you need to get back in there so we can get this money. So I go back in the booth and put the headphones back on, and I'm waiting for the music to come on, and I heard the voice again. The voice said, you will not record this song with this soul. And then my whole head felt like it caught fire, man. I just threw the headphones off, and I walked out of the booth, man. I said, I can't do it. And my partner said, look, Greg, I'll tell you something. He said, you in my house and you playing with my money. He said, if you don't get back in the studio and finish this song, he said, I'm going to hit you in your face, bro. I said, I'll tell you what. I said, I can fight you, but I can't fight God. So, there you have it. He said, man, you making me feel like a sinner. I said, what do you think you are? He said, bro, listen, get out of my house and don't ever come back. But about a week later, man, he came back and apologized. He let me know, man, that I'm supposed to be working for the kingdom, and that's what I've been doing ever since.